The death penalty, or capital punishment, has a long and contentious history in the United States, deeply intertwined with the nation's development and evolving societal values. This video explores the origins of the death penalty, its progression through American history, the moral arguments for and against it, and the modern movements towards its reform or abolition. Spanning over 4 centuries, the journey of capital punishment in the United States reflects broader themes of justice, human rights, and societal change. The death penalty in the United States has its roots in European colonialism. Early American colonists brought with them the legal traditions and practices of their countries of origin, primarily England. The first recorded execution in the American colonies was that of Captain George Kendall in Virginia in 1608. He was accused of espionage. During the colonial period, the death penalty was applied for a wide range of crimes, including theft, witchcraft, and many minor offenses by today's standards. Colonial laws were often harsh and reflected the stringent moral and social codes of the time. The Massachusetts Bay Colony, for instance, had a moral law code called Body of Liberties in 1641, which prescribed the death penalty for offenses such as idolatry, witchcraft, blasphemy, murder, sodomy, adultery, and rape. The infamous Salem witch trials of 1692, resulting in the execution of 20 people, underscored the early American penchant for capital punishment based on both legal and moral grounds. The Revolutionary War era brought about a reconsideration of the death penalty, influenced by Enlightenment ideas about justice and human rights. Leaders like Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin advocated for more humane forms of punishment and questioned the efficacy and morality of the death penalty. Jefferson, in particular, proposed a bill to revise Virginia's death penalty laws, suggesting that it be reserved only for the most egregious crimes, such as treason and murder. Although his bill was not passed, it marked the beginning of a long-standing debate about the appropriate use of capital punishment in America. The 19th century saw significant changes in the application of the death penalty in the United States, reflecting broader societal shifts. The century began with a continuation of the harsh colonial practices, but gradually moved towards reform. In the early 1800s, public executions were common and served as public spectacles intended to deter crime. However, growing concerns about the brutality and potential for error in such punishments led to the development of more controlled and private methods of execution. Pennsylvania was the first state to move executions away from the public eye, conducting them inside correctional facilities from 1834 onwards. The mid-19th century was marked by a burgeoning reform movement. Influenced by European reformers like Cesare Beccaria, whose work on crimes and punishments argued against the death penalty, American reformers pushed for change. In 1846, Michigan became the first English-speaking government in the world to abolish the death penalty for all crimes except treason. Other states followed suit, abolishing the death penalty or restricting its application to only the most serious crimes. However, the Civil War and its aftermath led to a retrenchment in some areas. The increase in violent crime and social upheaval resulted in a resurgence of capital punishment in certain states. The introduction of new methods of execution, such as the electric chair in New York in 1890, symbolized both a technological advancement and a continued commitment to the practice of capital punishment. In the early 1800s, public executions were common and served as public spectacles intended to deter crime. However, growing concerns about the brutality and potential for error in such punishments led to the development of more controlled and private methods of execution. Pennsylvania was the first state to move executions away from the public eye, conducting them within correctional facilities from 1834 onwards. The mid-19th century was marked by a burgeoning reform movement, influenced by European reformers like Cesare Beccaria, who argued against the death penalty. American reformers pushed for changes. Michigan became the first English-speaking government in the world to abolish the death penalty for all crimes except treason in 1846. Other states followed suit, abolishing the death penalty or restricting its application to the most serious crimes. However, the Civil War and its aftermath led to a retrenchment in some areas. The increase in violent crime and social upheaval resulted in a resurgence of capital punishment in certain states. The introduction of new execution methods, such as the electric chair in New York in 1890, symbolized both a technological advancement and a continued commitment to the practice of capital punishment. The 20th century was characterized by significant fluctuations in the use and legality of the death penalty in the United States, marked by periods of intensive use, legal challenges, and evolving public opinion. In the early decades, the death penalty was widely accepted and frequently used. The era saw the introduction of the gas chamber as a method of execution, beginning in Nevada in 1924. However, the Great Depression and the subsequent social changes led to growing scrutiny of the death penalty. The American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU, and other organizations began to challenge the constitutionality and morality of capital punishment. The civil rights movement of the 1960s brought new momentum to the abolitionist cause. Landmark Supreme Court cases began to address the procedural and substantive aspects of capital punishment. In 1972, the Supreme Court case, Furman v. Georgia, resulted in a de facto moratorium on the death penalty. The court ruled that the arbitrary and inconsistent imposition of the death penalty constituted cruel and unusual punishment, violating the 8th and 14th Amendments. However, this moratorium was short-lived. In 1976, the Supreme Court's decision in Gregg v. Georgia upheld revised state death penalty statutes, reinstating the death penalty under new guidelines intended to eliminate arbitrary application. This ruling marked the beginning of the modern era of capital punishment in the United States. The latter part of the 20th century saw a resurgence in the use of the death penalty, with many states reinstating capital punishment and increasing the number of executions. The advent of DNA technology in the 1990s, however, began to reveal several wrongful convictions, sparking renewed debates about the reliability and morality of the death penalty. The debate over the death penalty is deeply rooted in moral, ethical, and practical considerations. Arguments for the death penalty. Deterrence. Proponents argue that the death penalty serves as a powerful deterrent to serious crimes. The fear of facing the ultimate punishment, they contend, prevents individuals from committing capital offenses. The notion of deterrence is based on the idea that potential criminals weigh the consequences of their actions and that the death penalty, as the harshest possible punishment, discourages heinous crimes. Retribution. Retribution is one of the oldest justifications for the death penalty. It is based on the principle of an eye for an eye, the idea that perpetrators of certain crimes deserve to be punished in a manner proportionate to the offense. Proponents see the death penalty as a way to deliver justice for the victims and their families, ensuring that the punishment fits the crime. Closure for victims' families. Supporters argue that the death penalty provides closure for the families of victims. The execution of the perpetrator is seen as a form of justice that helps families cope with their loss and move forward. It is believed to offer a sense of finality and retribution that other forms of punishment do not provide. Prevention of recidivism. The death penalty is seen as a way to ensure that individuals who commit the most serious crimes cannot reoffend. By executing convicted criminals, the state removes the possibility of them harming others in the future, whether through escape or parole. Moral and legal tradition. Many supporters argue that the death penalty is a continuation of a long-standing legal and moral tradition. They contend that capital punishment has been accepted and practiced for centuries as a legitimate response to certain crimes, reflecting deeply ingrained societal values. Arguments against the death penalty. Wrongful convictions. One of the most compelling arguments against the death penalty is the risk of wrongful convictions. Advances in forensic science, particularly DNA testing, have revealed numerous cases where individuals sentenced to death were later found to be innocent. The irreversible nature of the death penalty means that any mistake is permanent and unjust. Lack of deterrent effect. Critics argue that there is little evidence to support the claim that the death penalty effectively deters crime. Numerous studies have shown that states with the death penalty do not have significantly lower crime rates than those without it. The complexity of criminal behavior suggests that the threat of execution is not a decisive factor in deterring crime. Moral and ethical concerns. Opponents of the death penalty contend that it is inherently inhumane and morally wrong. They argue that taking a human life, even that of a convicted criminal, violates fundamental ethical principles and devalues human dignity. The possibility of state-sanctioned killing is seen as incompatible with a civilized society. Arbitrariness and discrimination. The application of the death penalty is often criticized for being arbitrary and discriminatory. Studies have shown that factors such as race, socioeconomic status, and geographic location can significantly influence who is sentenced to death. This inequity undermines the fairness and impartiality of the justice system. Cost. The financial cost of the death penalty is another argument against its use. The lengthy and complex legal process associated with capital cases, including trials, appeals, and incarceration, is significantly more expensive than sentencing offenders to life imprisonment without parole. Critics argue that these resources could be better spent on crime prevention and rehabilitation programs. Changes in the death penalty in modern times. Significant strides towards abolishing the death penalty have been made in modern times. Evolving societal values, growing awareness of the flaws in the capital punishment system, and legal challenges have all been agents of that change. Legal reforms and abolition, state-level abolition. In recent years, several states have moved to abolish the death penalty. Since the early 21st century, states like New York, New Jersey, Illinois, Connecticut, Maryland, and Washington have all abolished capital punishment through legislative action or court rulings. These decisions reflect growing concerns about wrongful convictions, racial disparities, and the ethical implications of the death penalty. Moratoriums and commutations. Some states have imposed moratoriums on executions, either through executive orders or legislative action. For example, California Governor Gavin Newsom issued a moratorium on executions in 2019, citing the risk of executing innocent people and the discriminatory application of the death penalty. Other governors have commuted the sentences of death row inmates to life imprisonment, reflecting shifting attitudes towards capital punishment. Supreme Court decisions. The United States Supreme Court has played a crucial role in shaping the death penalty landscape. Key decisions have addressed issues such as the constitutionality of executing juveniles, Roper v. Simmons, 2005, individuals with intellectual disabilities, Atkins v. Virginia, 2002, and the requirement for unanimous jury verdicts in death penalty cases, Ramos v. Louisiana, 2020. These rulings reflect a more nuanced approach to capital punishment and have led to significant changes in its application. Grassroots activism has been instrumental in pushing for the abolition of the death penalty. Organizations like the Death Penalty Information Center, Amnesty International, and the Innocence Project have raised awareness about the flaws and injustices of the death penalty system. These groups have worked tirelessly to educate the public, advocate for legislative changes, and support individuals facing wrongful convictions. Shifts in public opinion. Public opinion on the death penalty has shifted significantly over the past few decades. While a majority of Americans historically supported capital punishment, recent polls indicate a decline in support. Factors such as high-profile exonerations, increased awareness of racial disparities, and moral considerations have contributed to this change. As public opinion shifts, so too does the political landscape, making it more feasible for legislators to consider abolition or reform. International influence. The global trend towards abolition has also influenced the movement in the United States. The United Nations and various human rights organizations have called for the worldwide abolition of the death penalty, citing it as a violation of human rights. Many countries have abolished capital punishment or limited its use to exceptional circumstances, placing the United States in a shrinking minority. This international pressure has spurred domestic activists and policymakers to reconsider the death penalty. The history of the death penalty in the United States is a complex and evolving narrative, reflecting broader societal values and legal principles. From its colonial origins to its contested status in modern times, capital punishment has been shaped by legal reforms, moral debates, and movements for change. While proponents argue for its deterrent effect and retributive justice, opponents highlight the risks of wrongful convictions, ethical concerns, and systemic inequalities. In recent years, significant progress has been made towards reforming or abolishing the death penalty. State-level abolition, legal reforms, and shifting public opinion signal a move away from capital punishment. Grassroots activism and international influence have played crucial roles in this transformation, highlighting the importance of continued advocacy and education. As the United States grapples with questions of justice and human rights, the future of the death penalty remains uncertain. The ongoing debate underscores the need for a careful and compassionate consideration of the values that underpin the nation's legal system. Whether through further reforms or complete abolition, the journey of the death penalty in the United States continues to reflect the evolving ideals of justice and humanity.